Almost everyone here at EDGE22 experienced the Transportation Security Administration and your airport screening that was part of your travel to San Diego. And air travel is a vital TSA responsibility. TSA operates in more than 440 federalized airports and coordinates with airports from around the world to ensure the safe movement of people and cargo. TSA employs more than 50,000 transportation security officers. Nearly 50% of these officers have more than 5 years' experience as counterterrorism professionals, and nearly 20% are veterans or still proudly serving. TSA screens well over 2 million passengers daily and over 750 million every year. Every day, TSA screens more than 1.4 million checked items and more than 5.5 million carry-on items for explosives and other dangerous items on 23,000 plus domestic flights and nearly 2,500 outbound international flights. Less known is that TSA also carries primary responsibility for the security of our nation's oil and gas transportation networks, and that responsibility increased dramatically following the Colonial Pipeline ransom incident last year. Gas lines and price hikes disrupted the economy and the lives of many millions of Americans. Colonial also highlighted both infrastructure security vulnerabilities that can never be completely eliminated and the importance of vigilant, experienced leadership to detect, respond, and remediate incidents before and if they occur. Austin Gould is the TSA Executive Assistant Administrator. Since joining TSA in 2018, EAA Gould continues as the Principal Component Requirements Executive and is responsible for identification of operational requirements for transportation security equipment at airports nationwide. He also directs TSA's capability management functions, ensuring robust support of equipment across the expansive TSA enterprise. In addition, EAA Gould supervises the TSA Risk Analytics and Procedures Groups and serves as chairman of the Department of Homeland Security Joint Requirements Council. A 30-year Coast Guard veteran, EAA Gould retired as captain after serving in a number of operational and management positions. As the Coast Guard Boat Forces Capability Manager, he was responsible for the procurement, configuration management, and support of the Coast Guard's fleet of 2,000 boats. To deliver the keynote critical infrastructure address at EDGE22, please welcome U.S. Transportation Security Administrative Executive Assistant Commissioner Austin Gould.
A wonderful, wonderful thing here, the engagements that we can have, that I can have as a government official from TSA with really key players in the industry are indispensable for me. You heard a little bit about my Coast Guard background. I was in charge of boat procurement. I ran the research and development program for the Coast Guard for a while. And I've got a true appreciation for public-private partnerships and the fact that collectively we can achieve way more than we can on our own. So this venue is fantastic. I love being in San Diego. And a quick round of applause, please, for everybody who put on that reception last night at the Midway. It was fantastic. I promise if I come back to this again, I will have bought bifocals. I'm still holding on to the fact that I don't really need them, but I'm really getting there. So the topic I was asked to talk about, and can you start the clock? Otherwise I'll talk all day, please. The topic I was asked to talk about is escalating security challenges in America's networked transportation infrastructure. Thanks a lot for narrowing it down. I thought a lot about what to talk to you about and how to approach the discussion. And I want to start off just from a very high level threat perspective. Make no mistake about it, threats to our national infrastructure are still out there, and they're growing more dangerous and aggressive, I believe, on a yearly basis. And it's everything from state actors, okay? All you gotta do is look at the media. The fact that we levied sanctions against Russia in response to the Ukrainian crisis, right away there was concern that perhaps there would be cyber attacks on US critical infrastructure, maybe the critical infrastructure of our allies. But it's not just Russia, right? I mean, there's all sorts of other state actors that are out there. There's ransomware companies that are out there that are being very problematic to deal with. There's domestic homegrown violent extremists. I mean, the intel that we see and the various aspects of it and where it's coming from, it is really, really, truly concerning. And I think collectively we've got to focus on that and ensure that we're doing all we can to secure the nation's critical infrastructure. But it's not just cyber stuff, okay? I jumped to that right away given the theme of the conference. But there's also concern about still kinetic attacks on aircraft or on critical infrastructure. There's a lot of concern about insider activities that we need to worry about. And insiders are something we really focus on at TSA because of the access that they have. I mean, think about it. We can do all we can to protect the physical infrastructure of an airport and ensure that we know who's getting on the plane and what they're carrying. But at the end of the day, there's still a pilot in control of the thing that could basically has access to do whatever he wants with it. So this insider thing, be it crew members or whatever, is really something that we look at very, very seriously. So what are we doing about it? I was sat on the panel yesterday on biometrics. John Wagner, my friend, was on that. It was really, really well run and had a couple of TSA folks on there. And there was a lot of discussion about risk. So taking it down from Intel, okay, and kind of what we see out there, what do we do about it? And something that we're very good at TSA, and I'll talk about it just briefly, is risk analytics. Now, I did a 30-year Coast Guard career, and there were some risk models that we used to tell me as a captain of the port what I needed to focus my resources on. But I was never aware of any like headquarters level risk management program. And when I came to TSA, I found out not only do we have one, but it's a really, really good one. And I want to walk you through it real fast because this is how we make decisions on what to invest in, okay? So at a very, very high level, we've got a risk management program called the Transportation Sector Security Risk Assessment. That's called TSRA. And that looks across the entire transportation sector and tells us what parts of the sector are at the greatest risk. We then have a model specific to aviation called RITSPA, which is the Risk and Trade Space Analysis model. And RITSPA tells us where we can invest our next dollar in security to buy down the most significant risk. And I want to explain that to you because we use those models in our budget formulation process. And this again is something that I'm very, very proud of that we do at TSA. We start looking at things from an intel and a risk perspective, and then we very carefully develop our budget requests so that we're sure that we're applying these scarce resources to the most critical problems that we face. And then both those models feed something called TSCAP, which is a Transportation Security Capability Assessment Program. And that's our requirement generating engine, okay? So you feed it with all this risk information, and at the end of the day, it will tell you what are bona fide requirements that we need to go after funding for, okay? I explain all that because when you look at the TSA's budget and where we're spending our money and where our focus is, it's all very traceable through these three programs back to where the greatest amount of risk is and how we can buy it down. As was mentioned in the introduction, which I'm still floored over, I chaired the Joint Requirements Council of the department for a while, for 2 years, and we did some traceability analysis of, what are the agency's budget requests and are they focused on validated capability gaps? And because of this analytic process, TSA is focused on really the right capability gaps. We always score very, very well in that process. So you let the cat out of the bag. I was going to ask for a show of hands, not that I can see any of you, okay? But I was curious, who knew prior to this morning that TSA had anything to do with pipelines? All right, so a pretty good portion. I will tell you, I worked at the agency for 3 months before anybody told me we had anything to do with pipelines, okay? And I actually have a part of my office that specifically deals with pipeline security issues. So the Colonial issue. I mean, that was a real wake-up call for us. I think it showed us how vulnerable our infrastructure could be. And if you've researched, I'm sure all of you have, probably know more about it than I do, the Colonial Hack, they didn't go after like industrial control systems or anything like that. They hacked the softer side of the company. I think it was the payroll systems or something, but they shut the pipeline down out of an abundance of caution that that particular hack would spread and cause more widespread damage. So some people would say, well, what's the big deal? They didn't hack anything that could potentially cause, a failure, a system, a spill, or anything like that. But I look at it and I say mission accomplished. I mean, they went after a system that you wouldn't necessarily think was particularly germane to the actual operation, and yet they still managed to shut down the pipeline with enormous, enormous consequences. So what have we done about that? After the Colonial pipeline hack, TSA used our authorities to issue some security directives, okay? And these security directives, we kicked out one right away, and it basically was set up a cybersecurity program, okay? You have to have somebody in charge of your cybersecurity program. You've got to have a plan. You've got to exercise your plan. Kind of those boilerplate requirements that we should have. And then we got more specific with cybersecurity requirements for pipelines, okay? And we started talking about how do you what are some of the best practices to physically ensure cybersecurity of your operation? Now, it was a really, really good effort and it was critically needed, but the measures that we put in place were very prescriptive in nature. You must do this. You shall do that, okay? And the result of that was we got about 500 appeals from I don't know how many companies saying, hey, we've got a better way to do this. They request what they call an alternate measure. We've got to review all these things. The volume of these alternate measures was significant. It was a lot to deal with, and we realized there had to be a better way to do security directives that would be easier for the industry to understand and implement. So we pivoted to what we call outcome-focused compliance. So instead of these very prescriptive requirements, you must do this, this, and this, we say you shall safeguard against intrusion. I'm saying that very generically, okay? But it's that kind of thing. So we're getting on the verge of releasing another security directive that is outcome-focused, and what I want to tell you about it is we collaborated significantly with the industry. I think we had 8 listening sessions and discussion sessions with the industry where we asked the pipeline operators, how would you approach this? How can we help you secure your infrastructure? I think it was a very, very good model, and the result of that is it took us longer to write the security directive because we had all this engagement, but it's passing through the review that it needs to go through very, very quickly based on that robust upfront thought that went into it. And we're going to use this model, outcome-focused compliance, elsewhere in the transportation sector. So we're going to work on outcome-focused compliance for rail, okay, because there are vulnerabilities with the rail systems that we want to close. And then we're going to also use it eventually on aviation. Before I go into some more details on what we're doing, the thing about outcome-focused compliance I want y'all to keep in mind, we issue the security directive, the operator has the opportunity to come back to us with an implementation plan, and then we have to go out and ensure there's compliance with that implementation plan. Outcome-focused compliance, without those specific requirements, it's a little bit harder on the compliance side of the house for the inspector to go out there and really understand what they're looking at. So we're gonna have to work through that. But we've got a great team in security operations at TSA that is looking at how to enforce this regime moving forward. So a little bit about aviation. And this kind of goes back to the Colonial Hack and the fact that they went after the softer side of the company. So with respect to aviation, everybody right away thinks, we want to have the airport secure, we want to have our transportation security equipment secure. But there's also a side of the agency that people don't necessarily think about, like the ticketing system or the departure control system. And the fact that if a bad actor was able to get in there and shut down those systems, the physical impact would be just as bad as them, hacking something, specific to an airline, for example. So we've got to be very careful about how we put these requirements in place to ensure that we're protecting the entire ecosystem in the aviation sector. Fuel farms is another one, right? Can somebody get in there and disrupt the flow of aviation fuel to airports? How would they do it? How can we guard against it? Something that we're working through. So I will tell you this, it's a great time to be at TSA. I couldn't be any happier that my career has taken me to TSA. Our administrator is extremely forward-leaning and extremely aggressive. I think you all probably know he just got nominated, well, he got nominated a while ago for a second 5-year term as the administrator, and his confirmation hearing is next week. So he has got the agency on a trajectory that is all about modernization, security effectiveness, and pay and benefits for our officers. And so it really is, it's just terrific to be a part of that. One of the things that he insists that we do is use roadmaps to describe how we're going to solve a particular problem. These roadmaps are publicly available. You can find them online. I mention it because there's a cybersecurity roadmap that might be of interest to you. There's a biometrics one that's out there. Identity management is also out there that talks about our digital identity work and whatnot outside of biometrics. And then there's a cargo security one. There are several others. We got a counter unmanned aerial systems roadmap coming out probably in the next month or so. And these foundational documents really chart the course for the activities that we're doing at TSA. So back to RITSPA. If you look at the RITSPA model, it will tell you that our ability to validate identity at the checkpoint really solves a lot of risk associated with the aviation enterprise. Our ability to identify people allows people into pre-check, our vetted population. That gets folks out of the standard screening lanes. It's a lighter level of screening that we can do because we've got good assurances of your background. It helps with a myriad of things. It's a better screening opportunity for people. It helps with the lines because it's a more expedited process. The pre-check travelers tend to be a little bit more professional about what they do. They know the divesting rules and everything. Everything works better. We're able to do that because of our identity management programs. I really enjoyed Mr. Baker's talk before. I caught the last part of it, and his discussion on our work in biometrics with CBP, I could have written those talking points for him. I could not be any prouder of the work that we're doing with CBP. And John Wagner, where are you? I'm giving you a shout out. You there, John? He's in the back. All right. John Wagner from CBP could not have been a better partner in us getting our biometrics efforts off the ground. I want to talk just briefly about it. I know you had a lot of biometrics talks as part of this conference, but we are determined to drive out error rates wherever they exist in the system. I'm very careful to use the term error rates because bias is a human characteristic. When you look at a machine, taking a photograph of somebody and trying to match it to a gallery, that is purely a mechanical transaction. And if it doesn't match, it's like a math error. It wasn't a good image capture. The characteristics that were collected in the image don't match the characteristics of the reference photo. Our use case, and it was described extremely well yesterday in the panel, is very limited, and we control the environment. So we get really high quality image capture, right? You can control the focal length from the camera, you can control the lighting, you can control the background. That quality image up front matched with a quality image in a gallery using the best algorithms that we can find, and they are exceptional. Our match rates are extremely high. And the other thing to mention is we're not matching somebody against the population of the United States, okay? We're matching you against maybe 500 people on a specific flight because they stage a gallery for that, and we know you're in the gallery. So we're looking for you, among 500 people. And then our use case has to scale a little bit for pre-check. It's up to maybe 10,000. But again, it's still a fairly small population of 1 to N, and we get very, very high accuracy out of it. So I just wanted to kind of foot stomp that a little bit. We're really focused on accessible property. That's carry-on baggage, CT machines, computed tomography machines, not unlike the ones that you would encounter in the medical field, are becoming more and more common in our checkpoints. They're a wonderful technology that really enhances detection and the officer's ability to resolve more alarms on screen. You can physically remove the you can virtually remove the laptop from the bag, you can rotate it, you can slice the image, you can really dissect the image in a three-dimensional manner that you can't with a two-dimensional X-ray. Huge, huge, huge improvement in security effectiveness. On-person screening. Nobody likes a pat-down, right? Nobody likes a pat-down. We don't like doing them. You don't like getting them. We've got a low false alarm algorithm that's been tested and it dramatically reduces the amount of false alarms you get out of the AIT machine. That's when you got to hold your arms over your head. When you get a false alarm, it automatically results in a pat-down. It might be targeted, it might not. But it's something that we're very fortunate has been developed, and we're going to be fielding it later on this year. It also has a tangential benefit of gender neutrality. Right now, the officer has to make an assessment of your gender when you approach the machine and select either male or female. This algorithm is gender neutral, so that we no longer have to make that judgment in the field. It really is a significant enhancement for us. And then alarm resolution. Because very briefly, what do you do when something does alarm? How do you identify exactly what you're dealing with? That's kind of the last big bucket of technology we're looking at in the checkpoint. Because we need to be able to very rapidly identify whether or not anything is actually a threat, clear that bag. Number one, from a security perspective, to know whether or not we've got a security incident on our hands. But number two, to really keep things moving through the checkpoint. So that alarm resolution is very, very important. So I'm going to get into a little cyber stuff now. Something that we're piloting in several locations and that I think is really a future for us is remote screening or cross-lane viewing. So remote screening means instead of having that X-ray operator sitting there watching these images go by right at the checkpoint, they're in a sterile environment on the airport property somewhere. It's quiet, the lighting's good, and they're watching the images go by. It doesn't matter what lane they're coming from, as long as the image goes by and the person can alarm it, and then the operator knows in the checkpoint, that really we think will provide not only security effectiveness, but also probably help us with throughput. Am I getting the hook? It says 8 minutes. And then perhaps we could go to a point where there's like centralized viewing nodes for like regions, where like maybe the state of Nevada, for example, this always comes up. You've got one central location where the major airports ship their images to, and they're reviewed remotely. From a officer distraction perspective, it's probably better security. From a pandemic perspective, it's probably better to have fewer people in the checkpoint, but you gotta be able to do it in a secure manner. You can't hack into that. You can't force the machine to skip a bag. You can't replace a bag's image for a specific passenger. You can't hide a threat that the officer might otherwise be able to observe. So those are some of the cybersecurity concerns we've got to work through. These CT machines, right? I said before, they're medical devices. Nobody cared when they were building them about cybersecurity. And we're very concerned about that now from our use case for them. So making them cyber secure has been a real challenge. The contractors are required to implement that capability on these machines, and it's something we're really going to focus on moving forward. So open architecture. I'm no expert in this, but we are requiring open architecture on all our transportation security equipment right now. This is not something we did in the past. The way the administrator describes it is we don't want to be beholden to the same CT manufacturer for their specific algorithm and their update schedule. We'd like to be able to mix and match CTs with the best of breed algorithms that we possibly can. There's a huge international thirst for this. If you have any interest in open architecture at all, you can Google it. There's a press release out today. Matt Gilkison on my team told me the administrators over in Europe meeting with ACI Europe, which is the airport's Council International, thank you. And they put out a joint press release on the need for open architecture and kind of the direction that we're going there. It's something we're really, really focused on. So networking our systems. It's hard to do. There's a lot of benefit associated with it. If we could just network the equipment in the checkpoint, we could potentially get to a scenario where we're using dynamic screening. So you present yourself at the TDC, the travel document checker position. They identify you, your secure flight results are returned. We know whether you're pre-check, standard, or quad S, or select D screener. You're gonna get that screening. And then the machines could automatically adjust, right? So instead of having separate lanes for separate functions, you've got a machine that'll adjust based on the passenger screening status. And not only would that help us with security effectiveness, which we always go back to, but potentially with throughput as well. And the other thing about networking our equipment is our ability to get data off the machines. Yemi, you're gonna love this as you get more involved with TSA. We got more data than we know what to do with, but we just can't find it, okay? It's out there somewhere, I don't know. When we gotta get data off a machine, we gotta send somebody specifically out there to touch the machine. If we wanna analyze throughput rates, we gotta send somebody out to the airport and they hand off a card and stopwatch and get the card back, okay, they write it down. I mean, there's gotta be a better way, right? But it all requires networking the equipment, and doing that in a cyber secure manner is gonna be critically important for us. Because again, at the end of the day, I can talk about throughput and whatnot all day long, but we're a security agency. That is first and foremost, don't ever lose sight of that. So all the talk that we have about improving the passenger experience and touchless screening, fewer pat downs, we can only do that provided we're not sacrificing security effectiveness. So I'm gonna let you do some questions here, just a couple last points before we get to it. Not particularly germane to this crowd maybe, but counter UAS, I am hyper focused on it. Drones are a problem. We've got a test bed down in Miami where we're testing drone detection equipment. There's a legislative proposal on the Hill right now to expand TSA's authority in this respect and also grant authority to other agencies. I think it's critically important that we get it because look what happened in Gatwick 3 years ago. Shut down the airport for 2.5 days, a day and a half or something like that. Thousands of flights canceled, hundreds of thousands of passengers stranded, $70-odd million in economic damage. It was a really big deal, and it could happen here. So we're very focused on drone security. And the last thing, back to cybersecurity concerns and our ability to pass data back and forth, we're working on something, again, with our wonderful partners in CBP. Oh, now it's Diane Sabatino, and she's a step up from Wagner, in case anybody's curious about that. We're working on something called One Stop, and we've got the authority to pilot One Stop right now. We're working on kind of where to do it from. It's probably gonna be from the UK to the United States. And what that means is, if your security regime in another country is commensurate with our security regime in the United States, then why do we have to screen you again when you get to the United States if you've been screened to our standards internationally, okay? So it's a great idea. You now then travel, you get to the airport, you stay on the sterile side of the airport and you proceed to your next flight and your bag goes tail to tail. It doesn't have to get pulled and go through customs. The only way that we can do that though is if we can share images of the bag very efficiently with CBP. So the thought is you screen the bags in the UK, you collect all these images, the plane takes a 6-hour flight across the Atlantic. CBP has 6 hours to review those images using whatever kind of algorithms or detection they need. And they can then select what bags they want to physically screen, and the rest just go right through. So we're working hard on that, but again, back to cybersecurity, it's got to be done right. Last thing I'll talk to you about, sorry, I forgot to talk about prohibited items. We've got algorithms that are now trained to find guns, gun components, grenades. We're working on algorithms that will find blunts, knives, sharps, that kind of thing. As these mature, we could get to a scenario where the officers are only viewing images on alarm. So the bag would go through, it would get screened by the machine, and unless that machine detects something that is potentially a threat, the officer wouldn't necessarily even see the bag and could focus more on the passengers. So I didn't leave a lot of time for questions. I'm really sorry. It is a pleasure to be here, and I've got time for a couple, I think. Anybody? I sense movement.
But there is no, there it is. Great presentation, Austin. Question, I love what you're talking about from a passenger screening perspective. What about the insider threat? You know, you go into an airport and you have hundreds of different vendors and airline employees and baggage handlers. How are you managing that insider threat, ensuring that these people, in fact, are who they say they are and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and they're not doing it in a place that they shouldn't be in?
It's a great question and it's a real challenge. My favorite are the catering trucks, right? I mean, they wheel carts of food on an aircraft and it's very difficult to detect, you know, anything in that environment. So first of all, we've got very strict vetting requirements on the people that are involved in that particular business. They've all got some form of credential, which we control, that allows them to participate in this work. And then we screen some of them. Now, I say that very deliberately. We screen some of them. We're right now not screening all of them before they go into the sterile air of the airport. And that's something we're working on, how to do that more efficiently, not adversely affect the airport's operation, but get a much better sense of what could be going on in the airport environment from an insider perspective. I don't have a great answer for you right now, but we're definitely working on it. Thanks for the question.
Austin, really good presentation. On the rail side of the things, that's the one area I notice when I travel, there's not a lot of sensors or information going through security when I take the train. What are some of the thoughts around that, and what is TSA doing with that?
It's another great question, thank you. So it's not just rail, I would say really anything in surface. We're aviation focused with very, very good reason, right? Being born out of 9/11. But the surface side of the house is extremely important, and we need to do better there. So we've done a couple of things. First of all, my office assesses screening technology for its performance, and we basically say whether or not the equipment performs as advertised. We then put that together in a toolkit. It's publicly available if anybody's interested in it, and we provide that to all our surface transportation stakeholders. That tells them what equipment to buy should they desire to buy some, okay? We recently looked at, is it practical to vet people on passenger rail? How would we do that? Would passengers agree to that? Not unlike we do for the aviation community. But it's very challenging because, again, there's no checkpoints. People can buy the ticket day of. I think you can probably still buy a ticket on a train in some circumstances if you want to. So that upfront vetting is very, very challenging. We maintain surface test beds where we demonstrate security capability to surface carriers, to include rail. And we try as much as we can to engage in public-private partnership with them so that they invest in these security systems. But like you said, it's not very visible, and we've got a ways to go there. But I will tell you this, based on the cybersecurity urgency that we're faced with right now, our involvement with the rail industry is 10 times what it used to be. I mean, we're routinely meeting with the Federal Railroad Administration, routinely meeting with key railroad operators in a very practical manner, and we're looking at about how we raise that, not only cybersecurity baseline, but the physical security that you're talking about. It needs to be done, but it's expensive, right? Anybody else? I'm a little over time. Okay, so thanks. Thanks for having me back. Really enjoyed the event, Don. Your team is wonderful, and I look forward to talking with you all later. Thank you.